Some creatures have a very special story. They were driven out by humans through monocultures, mining, or manufacturing. But in some places, nature is reclaiming its own. These are stories of change and of hope. Devon, in the southwest of England. If there's one colour that describes this region, it's green. A sea of fields stretching to the horizon. Life is less busy here than in the rest of the United Kingdom. Until an animal returnee turns everything upside down. David White has been a passionate photographer since childhood. The retired teacher has won several awards with his animal photographs. Nearly every day, he sets out on a photographic safari in his native Devon. One of these outings made headlines in 2013. His goal at the time was the River Otter, a small river only 44 kilometres long that was familiar to few people outside Devon and is rarely mentioned in travel guides. With David White's help, it has become famous throughout the country. David typically sets off in the early morning, when most people are still asleep. This ensures he will be undisturbed. Birds are his favourite motif, and also, how could it be otherwise, considering the river's name, otters. David knows all the inhabitants of the river. At least, he thought he did.
This is the spot where I found the print. As you see now, there are masses of dog prints everywhere. The day I came down and saw it was after the river had been in flood. All the prints had been washed away, and the newly exposed material, there was this strange print. It was an odd shape, it was too big, I just didn't recognise it, and that's when I knew we had something different on the river. And then after trawling a lot of the river, I found a few pieces of wood that had been cut, and they hadn't been cut by any man-made device. You could see no marks in it. and I was able to say, either we've got some giant squirrel that hasn't been discovered, or we've got a beaver present. But you can't have beavers, they've been extinct for 400 years. So I was very careful who I told. I wanted my credibility not to be blown apart. Then I have to start looking around, trying to find any evidence. And when I've got a photograph, the camera saw it and I did, then I know it's a confirmed sighting.
The few friends David told about his suspicion were more than sceptical and made fun of his search for the phantom of the River Otter. But David didn't give up. After all, his reputation was at stake. He was determined to solve this mystery and lay in wait for days. And finally, his perseverance paid off.
It was another year or so before I got my first, what I'd describe as a poor foggy photo. And then a little bit later, I did get a nice photo of the beaver, and I knew they were there.
As the last wild English beaver had been killed by hunters in the 16th century, the sensational news quickly spread. The animal was named Bob. Later, when an investigation revealed that the beaver was a female, Bob was simply renamed Mrs. Bob. The beaver moves slowly on land. Its real territory is the water. Beavers can stay underwater for up to 15 minutes and can maneuver nimbly, assuming the coast is clear. How Mrs. Bob ended up in the River Otter remains unclear. She probably escaped from a wildlife park or was abandoned. It was a mystery that fueled the media frenzy even more. Britain's first wild beaver in 500 years caught on camera. Wild beaver in the River Otter. A beaver in England? Well, I'll be damned. Everyone wanted to witness the miraculous return. People from all over the country flocked to the River Otter and boosted local tourism.
And that's the beaver chips where you can see all the knowing on it. You can keep them as souvenirs.
Idyllic Devon became the hotspot of an ever-growing beaver hype.
Look at that. Oh my God, yeah, look. Wow.
A beer was even named after the rodent and advertised with the slogan, "It has bite." And then, in 2014, it turned out that Mrs. Bob couldn't be the only beaver in the River Otter. There must be at least one other male animal.
Someone managed to film not just a beaver, but beaver kits, so they're breeding on the river. Now there is panic. We've got to get rid of them. We can't cope with them. And a high proportion of the local people decided, no, we want them to stay. So now we've got lobby groups and all sorts going backwards and forwards.
Beaver opponents were afraid the animals would damage the River Otter's adjacent farmland, the most important economic sector in Devon. Their nightmare scenario, diseases could be transmitted to livestock and beaver dams could flood fields. The discussion about whether the beavers should stay or be recaptured polarised the population and became the conversation topic in every pub. Back in Britain, but not entirely welcome. Government concerned about the return of destructive animal. Kill a pesky beaver and collect £1,000, urges Annette.
It was absolute chaos. There were a number of people who were genuinely interested. There were a lot who really didn't know, and there were a few who were very, very anti it, so we were all nervous.
As the government in London tended towards capturing the animals, unexpected beaver assistance came from the city of Exeter, the capital of Devon. This is where ecologist and animal rights activist Mark Elliott works, at one of the most respected regional environmental protection organisations.
At that point, we proposed this trial to see whether or not we could show that people and beavers could live alongside each other. So it was quite a tense time. They gave us a licence, but there was no public support, no public money put towards the trial at all. It was a big risk for the Devon Wildlife Trust particularly, because we were asked to apply for a licence, and then we had to take legal responsibility for them for the 5 years of the trial. So if they caused any damage, then we were financially responsible for that.
Despite the risk, Mark Elliott saw it as a once-in-a-lifetime chance for the comeback of a species that was extinct in nature in England. To convince the government to allow the beavers to live in freedom, they had to provide conclusive evidence of their many positive effects on the environment.
Earlier in the season. We had to do lots of research. We had to make sure the animals were healthy. We were trying to keep an eye on what was going on with those animals, where they were living, who they were coming into contact with. So we had to start really building those relationships with the landowners and the people that were being affected. So right at the beginning, you know, we were thrown into it very quickly, and we had a lot to do. We need to go and see,
like visiting people who were having trouble with beavers.
See the new dams there. Does that go? Because that doesn't look connected there.
It was clear to Mark Elliott and his colleague Jake Chant that the future of their fosterlings depended on whether the people who encountered the rodents on a daily basis would accept them. Since the beginning of the research project in 2015, they have been reachable around the clock at an emergency number. Aside from their scientific investigations, resolving emerging conflicts and finding compromises are their most important tasks. Pensioner Barbara Chambers lives along a little tributary of the River Otter. A number of Mrs. Bob's offspring have settled in as new neighbours and are continually invading her small orchard.
Wow, there we go.
A bit more mess than last year, isn't it?
That's really fresh too, isn't it? This is a really regular route. You can even see the footprints of them coming up and down this slide and then going across the orchard, taking a few apples, and then the ditch on the other side as well.
And only cyber apples.
Beavers just can't resist apples, which makes them suitable bait for camera traps.
There we are. Look, this is the one where we've been protecting.
but Barbara happens to love her apple trees. For this reason, Mark and Jake have secured their trunks. The metal mesh is meant to prevent the beavers from felling Barbara's apple trees to get at the coveted fruit. It's a simple and effective means of ensuring that further trouble doesn't arise in the first place.
The tree from any more feeding anyway. Yeah, it's all looking good. It's all looking good.
There's enough fallen fruit for the beavers, which Barbara is happy to share with them. Conflicts have continually increased since the sighting of Mrs. Bob in 2014. Since then, the beaver population has grown dynamically. By now, there are more than 22 families and nearly 100 animals in the catchment area. In search of a new habitat, a number of beavers have wandered up the smaller tributaries of the River Otter. Mark Elliott wants to monitor their behaviour at a small brook using camera traps. It's mostly along these shallower waters that problems with the population arise.
See what we get.
The shy nocturnal beavers are much more active here than along the main river. The beavers begin damming the water along the shallow streams. The animal architects have already anchored large tree trunks in the brook. Now they reinforce this framework with rocks, branches and mud. Beavers need the water to be at least 60 centimetres deep, so the entrances to their beavers' lodges are underwater and they can quickly disappear in case of danger. This diligent construction work naturally makes you hungry. To get to the tasty buds at the top of the trees, as well as additional building material, the beavers do what they're famous for. A beaver can easily fell a tree with a 30-centimetre diameter in a night.
Everyone says, you know, you're busy like a beaver. You know, you're constantly at it. And during the night time, if you come here, you can hear the beavers, you know, they're off chewing a tree somewhere and you can hear that sound. And it just never seems to stop. You know, they have got this constant energy and they just keep going and they're just always changing the environment, always doing something, always busy. Yeah, they would be the best employee you could ever imagine.
The largest dam that Mark Elliott has found so far was nearly 1.5 meters high. These constructions have earned the beaver the nickname ecosystem engineer. When unexpected visitors show up, it becomes apparent that the backed-up ponds fulfill their purpose as escape rooms. Their beaver research project obliges the Devon Wildlife Trust to regularly monitor all beaver territories.
Yeah.
Every time they do, Mark Elliott and Jack Chant are impressed.
Get a record of it.
Just one beaver family is enough to ensure that nothing remains as it was. The beaver's instinctive behaviour produces lasting changes in the landscape.
When you see these dams, particularly if a dam is given space, if the watercourse is given space, and so when the beavers bring the water out of the channel and across the floodplain, it's how rivers should be. And all of our rivers would once have been like that, but we have manipulated them and heavily manicured them. And it's lovely to see this sort of regeneration of our natural waterways. It's amazing to see.
But the reappearance of the beavers is not met with enthusiasm everywhere. Fishing is a popular sport in England, and more than 3 million Britons are regular anglers. One of them is Martin Harmer, chairman of the Launceston Anglers Association. He and his friends primarily fish for trout and salmon that swim up rivers in the southwest of England in springtime to spawn. When they have a fish on the line, they usually throw it back into the water. Many fish species in English rivers are endangered and are finding less and less suitable living space. Salmon are even threatened with extinction.
I see a lot of the reasons for beaver introduction is to provide increased wetlands and perhaps to slow the flow in rivers and improve habitat. The only problem is that the introduction of beavers and their associated dams may impinge or affect the migration of the salmon and sea trout up and down the river, not only when they are babies, but when they are larger.
Previous research results by the Devon Wildlife Trust refute these concerns. Despite the beaver dams, the fish population in the River Otter has even increased over the past few years. Yet the anglers are still not convinced.
These rivers have been managed and maintained without beavers for 400, 500 years now. So we have to be pragmatic with beaver introduction. We're not against it, but we need some closely monitored trials of the release of beavers and to see how they integrate into the ecosystem.
Precisely this research programme is the core responsibility of the Devon Wildlife Trust. The problem is just that the River Otter and its tributaries are wedged in almost everywhere between fields used for agriculture. How can Mark Elliott make reliable statements about the influence of beavers on nature in this human-dominated world when beavers have no place in it? At this critical point, Mark can fall back on a unique experiment. In 2011, 70 kilometres west of the River Otter, an area of almost 3 hectares was fenced in and a pair of beavers returned to the wild there.
So we did them over here first, and then they cut them out. Him down here was quite useful.
Since then, Mark Elliott and scientists from the University of Exeter have been investigating the change in this unique open-air laboratory. The researchers don't actively intervene in the enclosure. They merely observe what happens when beavers are allowed to live undisturbed. From the very first day, the four-legged landscape gardeners began reshaping their new home. They used not only their teeth, but especially their paws, which they used deftly like 2 hands. Beavers are among the most creative architects in the animal kingdom.
So they were starting to build canals within a few weeks. They were starting to build dams across the channel. They were digging out great big water bodies within the space of a few, the first winter of putting them in. This site was already really looking very different. And I don't think any of us were quite expecting anything quite as dramatic as that.
These changes transformed a small forest with a narrow brook into a wet wilderness. Because the beaver fells individual trees, more sunlight reaches the ground. At regular intervals, Mark Elliott investigates the effect this has on the vegetation at precisely determined sites. His investigations over the last 10 years show that the beaver has helped to develop a forestry monoculture into a biodiverse ecosystem with many ground-level shrubs and plants that can hardly be found elsewhere in Devon.
We call beavers a keystone species because they have this dramatic effect, but it's chaotic. It's a very messy effect. But if you're an ecologist, you see all these opportunities for different species within that chaos. So it's a dynamic thing. What they do with water, the way they push water in different directions, the way they fell trees, the way they engineer the environment is very much using the natural processes and bringing the natural processes back to life.
Whereas insects are dying out worldwide, 12 native species of dragonfly are now living here again, some of them rare. Among them is the little azure damselfly. And the southern hawker, which is just shedding its exoskeleton. It takes more than 2 hours for its body and wings to be pumped up and hardened. Then it's ready for its maiden flight. Life has also exploded in the water. The number of aquatic beetle species has increased 5-fold, and conservationists find nearly 70 times more frog spawn today. Which makes not only researchers, but other animal species happy. The beaver ponds that scientists at the University of Exeter are researching are responsible for the rapid growth in biodiversity. They use a sonar boat to measure the depth of the ponds and to calculate how much water they store. Other measuring devices record the volume of water that flows through the enclosure. Professor Richard Brazier heads the investigations and supports the Devon Wildlife Trust. His data is meant to prove the beaver's usefulness in maintaining the water balance. However, in their urge to create, beavers take no consideration of science.
It's not easy working with beavers at all. We find that they build these dams right on top of the equipment that we're trying to use to monitor what they're doing. And so we came back one time, for example, and we saw no rainfall overnight, and yet the water depth was another 30 centimetres higher. And it was nothing to do with the rain, it was all because the beavers had built a dam in our monitoring equipment.
There's one device that Richard Brazier doesn't need to worry about eager beavers destroying. Every year, the researchers photograph the enclosure with a drone to gauge the complete extent of the water area. Things that remain hidden by the wild and inaccessible terrain only become visible from a bird's-eye view. They suspect that the beavers have built at least 2 additional dams. Hundreds of photos which they assemble into a high-resolution image will later attest to this. Over the past 10 years, this method has allowed them to document a remarkable change. Before the beavers' arrival, a 30-centimetre wide brook flowed through the enclosure, which regularly dried out in the summer. The beavers dammed this rivulet until it turned into a pristine water landscape. By now, 13 dams store more than 1 million litres of water over an area of 1,600 square metres.
When we walk into a beaver land and we see the changes that they've brought about, that brings us back in time. To a sort of pre-human intervention a vision of the world. And it is not straight. There are no straight channels. It is not water flowing fast. But an exciting finding, which we didn't even think about, was that in the dry times of year, like now in the summer, when there is no water flowing into the top of the beaver site, there is still water leaving the bottom of the site. So the drought response of beaver dams is to keep water in the landscape, which of course for the streams and the aquatic life that live in those streams downstream of beaver sites is a fantastic thing. It is putting water back in the dry times.
The beaver ponds don't just improve the microclimate, they are also valuable allies in the battle against the impact of climate change. Richard Brazier has noticed something else. He collects a sample of the water that flows into the enclosure. It's a lot murkier than the water that leaves the enclosure below the beaver dams. The difference between the samples is apparent. Richard wants to solve this mystery in the laboratory at the University of Exeter.
And if you see how that's changed from previous years, we can see how originally it's just the one pond.
His hypothesis is that the beavers not only store water and create a new natural paradise, but that their dams, staggered one after the other, might also form a natural wastewater treatment plant.
Water all the way through the site.
An analysis of the different water samples should show whether his hunch is correct. Both are filtered, their chemical ingredients broken down. Richard Brazier suspects the beaver dams work like this experimental arrangement as a giant natural filtration system.
Okay, so this is the drone flight from yesterday's survey at Boldventure.
Right.
The lab results confirm this theory.
See how the site's developed.
The natural dams slow down the speed of the water so that sediments settle and plants can pull pollutants from the water. Phosphate and nitrate levels are significantly lower below the beaver enclosure than above it. Sludge that has been contaminated by agriculture flows into the enclosure, and purified water flows out of it.
Beavers, we call them ecosystem engineers because they change the whole of the ecosystem. If you like, they are also water resource managers. They look after the quantity of water and they look after the quality of water as well. And this is something they do really without even thinking. It is natural behaviour to these beavers.
There is a certain irony to the fact that the beavers can only act out their natural behaviour in an enclosure. The beavers' positive effects on the environment in the fenced area are undeniable. But is this also the case when no limits are set for the beaver, when its chaotic nature meets our structured world? Devon is farm country. More cows live here than in any other English county. They provide more than 1 billion litres of milk annually, valued at nearly 300 million euros. Bicton College is located in this agrarian hotspot. It's one of the most prestigious agricultural schools in the United Kingdom. The college, located right near the River Otter, is representative of the scepticism that the majority of farmers have regarding beavers. James Coombe has been the farm's manager of the college's agricultural operations for 7 years. Aspiring farmers and agroecologists don't just sit in lecture halls, they learn firsthand from James what it means to run a farm.
Nice and clean in here for the start, Bill.
The Bicton farm owns 180 cows, a mid-sized livestock farm for southwest England.
I would have thought in that clovery grass up there, that's going to help keep them clean as well. I guess whilst it's
However, since 2017, James Coombe has had to manage not only the students' education and the milk yields of his cows, he also manages beavers.
Ms. Rory, tell me a bit more about it.
Basically, they've moved up a bit.
At the time, a family of beavers moved through a small brook from the River Otter to the property of Bicton College. Within a short period of time, they dammed the water and flooded wide areas of pasture land.
Year and a half, they began to move up the stream here, right past the moor.
James Coombe and his team work closely with the Devon Wildlife Trust. They only recently let the water run off from a beaver pond, but the beavers seem to be damming the stream up again.
Yeah, OK, thanks. We'll just have to keep monitoring it.
When James first heard about the sudden return of beavers to the River Otter, he was as fascinated as everybody else. But his opinion of the new neighbours changed as the beavers built their dams on the college's land. He thinks the media often portray only the beavers' positive effects and don't take the concerns of affected parties like him seriously.
It's possible that a good quarter of the low-lying fields around us, as an absolute minimum, possibly could be flooded if we just left the beaver to express their natural behaviour. So, yeah, we're managing this, so we're monitoring it very regularly, and if we weren't doing that, the damage could spread out much more rapidly.
If they don't regularly drain off water from the beaver ponds, 4 hectares of pasture land could be permanently flooded. But Bicton College, like most of the other farmers, wants to use every square metre of land right up to the waterways. Otherwise, Bicton College alone would lose €18,000 in revenue annually.
The whole river valley here is farmland, but to give it over for environmental benefits like beaver habitat could be a very sensible thing to do. It's not only the financial impact of our production that is important, it's a bigger question, isn't it, about how much impact are we willing to accept versus the environmental benefit it provides. And as farmers, we're being told that there will be compensation levels and schemes that will be available. But at the moment in the UK, I think the farmers' feeling is that a lot of the detail for those schemes isn't really 100% available. So we're currently a little bit in the dark as to exactly how it will all play out.
Up to now, the English government has refrained from making binding commitments. Though many farmers understand the advantages the beavers provide for the environment and the water supply, they insist on receiving compensatory payments. As long as this financial incentive is missing, Mark Elliott and Jake Chant must continually go out to drain water from beaver ponds, though even a narrow flood corridor next to the waterways would suffice to guarantee peaceful coexistence between farmers and beavers. Without compensations, all Mark and Jake can often do is tear down the dams. As paradoxical as it sounds, this ultimately helps the beavers. It's the only way to diffuse conflicts so that farmers don't take action against the beavers on their own. But the beavers have little sympathy with this demolition work. Mark and Jake have to tear down the new dams up to 4 times before the beavers give up and move on. Even though the dams could contribute to solve another major problem in Devon. Southwest England is regularly plagued by heavy rainfall. More than 120 litres per square metre of water can rain down here in just an hour from fronts moving in from the Atlantic. These are storms that cause devastating floods, most recently in 2012 and 2014, with nationwide damage of more than €1 billion. In England, the Environment Agency is responsible for flood protection. For more than 15 years, Tom Dorban has analysed the risks of storms for the counties of Devon and Cornwall. Vast coastal and river areas are considered to be at a high risk of flooding. His agency spends €50 million per year just on flood protection in these 2 regions. The Little River Otter is also considered a risk zone. A simulation shows that during heavy rainfall, it quickly flows over its banks and causes large-scale flooding of residential areas.
So in southwest England, there are around 130,000 people at risk of flooding. We have incredibly small river catchments which respond very quickly to rainfall that comes off the Atlantic Ocean. Those rapid response, heavy rainfall driven type events are predicted to be around 1 in every 3 years somewhere in the UK, and predicted to increase in frequency and unpredictability as climate change starts to impact more.
A great deal of money went into the construction of earth and concrete dams in recent decades to protect large cities like Exeter from the water masses. Yet the height of the dams was calculated based on simulations that are already outdated due to increasingly frequent torrential rains. Raising them higher would involve extremely costly and protracted construction projects. As a result, the Environment Agency radically changed its thinking.
To explain a flood, we have what we call a hydrograph, which looks at the discharge of the river catchment, and what that typically looks like is a bell curve. But what we like to try and do is reduce the peak of the flood. You can't change the volume of it because you can't change the water that comes out of the sky. So the size of the water is going to remain the same. What we like to try and do is slow it and lengthen the period that the flood happens over, so the impacts are lower and they're dealt with at an acceptable level.
The magic formula for this new approach is natural flood management. It sets its sights, not on the major rivers, but on the wide open spaces where the rain falls. Installing flood protection measures in unpopulated Dartmoor seems absurd at first. The local inhabitants also eye Tom Dorban sceptically. Yet the approach holds promise. Heavy rains have previously turned this dry canal into a raging torrent. As a countermeasure, the Environment Agency has built stone dams to slow the water masses. The rainwater no longer rushes rapidly down into the valley, but instead is dispensed over a longer period of time. It's an effective and cheap solution. A single stone dam costs only £700. The Environment Agency is experimenting with a variety of natural materials. They build wooden dams in a different drainage channel. Tom monitors the wooden planks. They are meant to slow the water, not dam it. Otherwise, the dam could break and result in an even larger flood.
What we're trying to do now is build structures like the leaky dam behind me, right where the flooding originates, where the cause comes from. So the idea being that we have hundreds of structures like the one behind me scattered across the upper catchment, and then the solution starts where the problem is.
If engineers are erecting stone and wooden dams, couldn't beavers do the work for them on small streams? After all, the animal architects have been building their dams for thousands of years, completely for free. This is precisely what Professor Richard Brazier at the University of Exeter wants to find out. It turned out to be a stroke of luck that records were kept of the water volume during heavy rainfall at one brook for years before beavers settled there. Since then, his instruments have measured whether these levels have changed as a result of the beavers' dams. The results are clear. Red shows the original water volume before beavers lived by the brook. Blue shows the much lower levels due to the animals' dams. Instead of what was previously a normal flood in red, the blue curve that resulted from the beaver dams is exactly what the Environment Agency has set as its target: a lower and extended runoff of the water masses.
Beavers, when they build dams, can help us to manage the risk. They can reduce the impact of the flooding, they can store some of the water, and they can make it so that our normal flood defences are more resilient, especially as we get bigger flood events under climate change.
This actually works, as can be seen in the village of East Budley, which lies along a tributary of the River Otter. As harmless as the little brook looks, during heavy rains, it normally floods large sections of the village. Though there have been storms, these floods have not occurred for 4 years. There is a very natural explanation for this miracle just a mile above East Budley. 4 years ago, a beaver family settled there and began to dam up the narrow brook.
Here we are, I've got this huge beaver pond now.
Richard Brazier wants to show the Environment Agency how useful beavers are for flood protection. Up to 62% of the water volume that formerly reached East Budley during heavy rains has been held back by the beaver dams.
This. I mean, you know how dry it's been.
Yeah.
I just think
Professor Richard Brazier is sure that the Environment Agency could find no better natural flood protection than beavers.
Yeah.
You can't imagine it until you see it, and then you understand how it would change the flow of the water.
That's what we need as well.
Tom Dorban is impressed by the results of the research. By now, his agency has classified beavers as useful for minimising the extent of flood disasters.
There's an English expression of putting all your eggs in one basket. You don't rely on a single thing because you can have one failure and that's your risk manifesting. So beavers in collaboration with flood walls, flood storage, a warning system, community preparedness and education, all those things need to fit together effectively to provide resilience to a community. Beavers can be a fantastic part of that, but we're still learning how to piece those things together.
The beaver's return provides great opportunities. The ecosystem engineers not only increase biodiversity to minimise the loss of productive land through flooding, they also clean the water and prevent flooding. Such is the conclusion of the Devon Wildlife Trust at the close of its research project. But will the English government follow suit, or will it still have the beavers recaptured? Why 2020 has been good for England's beavers. Beaver families win legal right to remain. England's first wild beavers allowed to live on River Otter.
Felt like a good day, that one, when we actually finally found out that the River Otter beavers would stay. Showed that the work that we'd done for 5 years had paid off. You know, we had got this animal back in our landscape again, and formally recognised that it was back where it should belong. So it was a good day.
But the decision was only a partial victory, because wild beavers are expressly only permitted to live on the River Otter. Whereas about 25,000 beavers live in Germany, in England they are a rarity despite their usefulness for nature. Whether the animals should also be reintroduced in other areas of England is a topic of continued debate. This will ultimately depend on whether people believe that humans and animals can coexist, and whether people are prepared to admit a little bit of chaos into our world.